expertise in fiscal analysis, economic research, microeconomic analysis, forecasting and international trade. He was born in Masvingo in Zimbabwe. He attained a Master's of Science degree in economics from the University of Zimbabwe in 2015, after having graduated from the same university with a BSc honors degree in economics. Mr. Chivore, please take over, sir.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Today we are gathered for Sadc model law on public finance management, and we are consulting with attorneys general of the Sadc member states. So on our program, we are supposed to start with introductions, but I see they have already been done, but I'm not sure if those countries who we had not yet joined have managed to join us. So if you allow me just to do again a roll call in the next 2 minutes to see if we have representation from countries that have that had not joined us when we did that roll call. Do we have representatives from Angola? Angola, not yet.
Mr. Chivore, I see that we have a hand up from Madagascar.
Okay, Madagascar, please proceed. Madagascar, please proceed. Hello, Madagascar. Oh, perhaps.
The name is Harrison Olivier Ernest Andrianzoa. Please take the platform you've been given. Your hand is up. It doesn't seem like they want to take the platform. Chat, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Perhaps in the interest of time, can I request participants to introduce themselves in the chat platform, indicating their country and their designation in the chat platform, please? Because I see we are already 10:12. If participants can register in the chat platform, just indicating your country and your designation, that will save us lots of time. And again, in the interest of time, if I will then proceed to the welcome address, and the one to give us that welcome address is none other than our Secretary General, who needs no introduction, and I'm sure most of us participants know her. So I will then leave this time to Ms. Boemo Sekoma, our Sadc PF Secretary General, to proceed with a welcome address. Madam, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Director of Ceremonies. Our keynote speaker, Mr. Daniel Don Deya, the Chief Executive Officer of the Pan-African Lawyers Union, my brother from the trenches. Good to see you today and welcome. It was such a surprise when I saw your biography on my table. I said, what is Dan doing here? So thank you very much for honoring us today. Distinguished Attorney General and officials from the Attorney General's office, from Sadc member states, members of the Technical Working Group on the Public Financial Management, our facilitator, who is ably representing the Technical Working Group, Mr. Pepukai Chivori, Sadc citizens following proceedings on various social media platforms, members of the media, staff from the Sadc Parliamentary Forum and member parliaments, distinguished participants. Allow me to extend my fraternal greetings and warm welcome to you all, our distinguished participants, to this consultative session that heralds the development of the Sadc model law on public financial management. This session is dedicated to yourselves as representatives from Attorney General offices, since you are directly involved with the administration of the legal framework of your respective countries. As you may be aware, the Sadc Parliamentary Forum has since the last decade been developing a Bill of Rights in the form of successive model laws, which are standard setting instruments to facilitate domestication and advocacy exercises in view of enactment of similar norms at the domestic level. These norms, distinguished participants, can take the form of regulations. It can take the form of laws or administrative guidelines, which are done under the authority of law. Distinguished participants, there are thus several ways of reflecting the Sadc model laws into the national sphere. And I'm sure that most of you must have been involved in the domestication endeavors of the Sadc Parliamentary Forum in one form or another during previous initiatives organized in collaboration with our national parliaments. Allow me to state that in the last decade, the Forum has developed the Sadc model law on HIV and AIDS. Our keynote addressee today was actively involved in that process. The model law on eradicating child marriage and protecting children already in marriages, the Sadc model law on elections, with the model law on gender-based violence being the most recent addition, which was adopted at the 50th Plenary Assembly session held last December. The Sadc model law on public financial management is the very first model law that speaks to financial and economic issues, an era yet explored or unexplored by the Forum and its membership. Distinguished participants, it is thus with unique satisfaction and pleasure that we engage with you, legal advisors of governments of the Sadc region, to help us consider the provisions of this model law that brings a new dawn of change to the Sadc Parliamentary Forum's legislative portfolio. In addition, I wish to highlight that the Sadc model law on public financial management is the first of its kind in the world. And the Forum is thus stepping towards the discovery of a completely new territory of norms in financial management that are essential for good governance and democratization in the Sadc region. Distinguished participants, today I address you as lawyers, but also as legislative drafters who are seasoned in reflecting policy of the executive into law that is subsequently enacted through the institution of Parliament. We are aware that the Attorney General's office does not formulate finance or governance policy, but instead advises on same from a legal and constitutional perspective, thus a crucial function in a healthy democracy. The Attorney General's office is known to be the principal advisor of government. The Attorney General is also normally a member of cabinet, and law can only be tabled to cabinet once vetted by the Attorney General's office. In some Sadc countries with presidential systems, The Attorney General also directly advises the President, who operates at the very helm of the state. Representatives present today thus occupy a fundamental function in the legislative process by understanding policy considerations and mirroring the same into law, whilst making sure that the law captures comprehensively the formulated policy. Distinguished participants, there are thus no better than representatives of Attorney General's offices to determine what the state of the public financial management framework at national level, and to compare through a legal analysis how the PFM framework may be improved by domestication provisions from the model law. It is of course understood that policy follows the law and not vice versa. But the rationale of today's engagement is that you will be ready for public financial management legislative drafting when the right public financial management policy has ripened and taken shape at the level of your line ministries. Distinguished participants, as advisors to the government, you also advised on whether public financial management irregularities or maladministration have occurred, and whether legal proceedings should be issued against defaulting parties. In addition, representatives of the Attorney General's office often advise on international best practices and policies, and the provisions of the Sadc model law will constitute additional information for benchmarking at the time when financial or revenue-related treaties will be signed by member states. Last but not least, the Attorney General's office is directly involved with drafting of at least 3 to 4 laws that relate to state finances every year, including the Appropriation Act, the Finance Act, which reflects measures taken through the budget, and the Supplementary Appropriation Act. Although the nomenclature may vary across Sadc member states, the rationale of enacting budget legislation is the same. And this is done through the collaborative enterprise and assiduity of the Attorney General's office. Distinguished participants, today we expect that you consider the model law with an open mind and interact on relevant provisions of interest with the legal drafter, Dr. Greenberg, and rapporteurs. Since you are legislative drafters by profession, all provisions of the model law will be relevant to you. However, you may pay particular attention to Part 4 on public funding, Part 5 on appropriation, and Part 7 on the national budget, since these are provisions which relate to legislative activities, enactments, and possible subsidiary legislation that will be channeled and processed through your offices. In addition, you may wish to consider the provisions on parliamentary control, which aim to heighten the powers of parliamentary committees. However, bearing in mind the sacrosanct notion of separation of powers. Dear colleagues and distinguished participants, pursuant to this consultative meeting, the forum's engagement with Attorney General's office will not stop here. We will continue to coordinate various issues pertaining to domestication, and the forum will pursue with capacity building on public financial management legal norms in collaboration with partners. The forum will thus accompany member states as we make progress with domestication. In addition, we plan to hold coordination sessions with the dedicated forum organ for domestication. the Regional Parliamentary Model Laws Oversight Committee and line ministries may engage with the Attorney General's office in view of submitting comprehensive state reports on public financial management to this committee. As I conclude, distinguished participants, we all want a better life and a better standard of living in the Sadc region. We are conscious that this will not happen whilst public funds are squandered without a proper oversight of Parliament. This is why the model region that responds to democratic needs of its citizens. In the decades to come, the model law will be a locomotive pulling steadily the train of Southern Africa towards a promised destination of Uhuru, imbibed with the good governance and freedom from corruption, which are the tenets of a thriving democracy. On this progressive journey, I'm confident that you will act as the legal custodians of the incremental domestication of the model law for the benefit of the Sadc region. On this cheerful note, I wish you all a pleasant session, candid deliberations, and a good day. I thank you, Director of Ceremonies.
Oh, thank you very much, Secretary General, for those words. We can't really thank you enough for that opening speech. And without running into the risk of repeating what you said, I think we all heard that we want better lives for our people in Southern Africa. And this model law will be a locomotive to pull us towards that promised land. And we also heard that our attorneys general have a big role to play, especially in the domestication of these model laws. So I won't repeat what you said, Madam, but just to say thank you very much for those inspiring words. And you have set the tone for our meeting today. And I'm sure you also highlighted some key sections of the model law that our attorneys general can also look into and comment. If we are to proceed with our program today, I'm now going to request our keynote address that is going to come from none other than the Chief Executive Officer of the Pan-African Lawyers Association, Mr. Don Dare. So if I can give a brief background of Mr. Dare, he is a Chief Executive Officer of the Pan-African Lawyers Association, that is acronymed PALU. And among other things, he chairs the Executive Committee of the Pan-African Citizens Network, that is PASSIN, formerly known as the Center for Citizens Participation in the African Union, the STOP the Bleeding Consortium, and the International Coalition for the Responsibility to Protect. He is also the Vice Chair of the Financial Transparency Coalition, FTC. He is a current steering committee member and former chair of the African Court Coalition, and is also a former secretary of the African Forum of the International Bar Association. He is also a former member of the Executive Committee of the International Institute of Law Association of Chief Executives. Mr. Don Dare is an advocate of the High Court of Kenya and was previously the CEO of the East African Law Society. And before that, acting executive director of the Kenyan section of the International Commission of Jurists. And preceding that, he was the deputy CEO of the Law Society of Kenya. While at the EARS, he founded the East African Civil Society Organization Forum. You may be interested to know that he litigates extensively at the African Court on Human Rights, and on human and people's rights, and the East African Court of Justice. He has engaged in advocacy with several organs and institutions of the African Union. African Development Bank, African Legal Support Facility, and Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa, COMESA, the International Conference on the Great Lakes Region, Intergovernmental Authority on Development, the East African Community, and the Sadc, among others. He also engages the United Nations system and the International Criminal Court. Mr. Dondea, can you please proceed to give us the keynote address?
Thank you very much to our Master of Ceremonies, Mr. Pepekai Chivore. I'm glad to be here. To the Honorable President of the Sadc Parliamentary Forum or his representative, to the Honorable Attorneys General present and senior officials from our various offices of Attorneys General present, to the Honorable Ministers present or the senior officials, to the Honorable members of the Sadc Parliamentary Forum itself and members of national parliaments present, to the Honorable Secretary General of the Sadc Parliamentary Forum, my longtime comrade, Boemo Segoma, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I bring you greetings from the leadership of the Pan-African Lawyers Union, and in particular from our President, Chief Emeka Obegolu, Senior Advocate of Nigeria from Abuja, Nigeria. He's sad he couldn't join us today. From the PALU Vice President for the Southern African region, Mr. Gilberto Caldeia Correa from Beira, Mozambique. And also greetings from the PALU Treasurer, Ms. Gigi Reed Miles from Manzini, Eswatini. As I had informed him that I would be interacting with the Honorable Attorneys General from his region, I also bring you the greetings of the President of the Southern African Development Community Lawyers Association, Ms. Antolani Maxwell Bokwana. He also sent his greetings. I also bring you the greetings of my colleagues from the Stop the Bleeding Consortium, a consortium of 7 leading continental level Pan-Africanist civil society organizations, which are working together also with our governments, with the regional economic communities, and with the African Union for economic justice in our world and for good economic governance on our continent, including through combating illicit financial flows, combating corruption, and better negotiation and governance of our sovereign debt, especially in this period of the COVID-19 pandemic, when many of our economies, literally all of our economies, have been battered, and our governments are struggling to mobilize sufficient resources to provide much needed public services, in addition to protecting our populations against the disease and against other challenges. I highlight that it is a great honor for PALU as an institution and for I personally to be invited to deliver the keynote address on the occasion of this important consultative meeting with Attorneys General from the Sadc member states on the draft Sadc model law on public financial management. From the outset, let me state that public financial management, or PFM, as we call it in English, is a cornerstone in the provision of public services to the citizenry. Further, prudent public financial management is critical to national stability and to the maintenance of a healthy democracy and to nation building. These objectives are underpinned by good governance, transparency, and accountability, which are all tenets of a robust public financial management framework, as well as tenets of the rule of law. At the same time, prudent financial management calls for proper planning and allocation of adequate financial resources to ensure that the use of scarce resources is optimized and value for money is realized. Furthermore, I welcome the fact that this model law takes into account the issue of domestication of all the important international and regional commitments that most Sadc states have already subscribed to, such as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, the African Union's Agenda 2063, important African Union treaties, such as the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and its corresponding protocols, including the Protocol on the Rights of Women in Africa, such as the International Covenants on Civil and Political Rights, and also on economic, social, and cultural rights, just to mention a few. So through the comprehensive budget document that this model law proposes, I believe that the monitoring of the implementation of these commitments in these treaties will be immensely facilitated. And the domestication of this model law, when that happens, will therefore have a ripple effect on the ease with which other international commitments are fulfilled by the SADC member states, and to be able to report on them during treaty reporting procedures. Needless to say, attorneys general are linchpins in the legislative machinery of any government, and therefore also in the public financial management framework. As we all know, attorneys general are responsible for providing the entire gamut of legal advisory services to the state. In almost all of our SADC member states, this is a constitutional mandate. It is required expressly by the Constitution. The duties of attorneys general include rendering wide-ranging legal advice to the state and to state corporations and enterprises, drafting legislation, drafting or reviewing international agreements, bilateral and multilateral, to which their state would be party. More importantly, for our purposes today, attorneys general are responsible for drafting and or approving tax legislation, appropriation acts, debt agreements, advising governments on domestication of regional and international legal instruments, including model laws like the one under discussion today, amongst others. To this end, I'm of the view that, sorry about that. Pardon me for that. I'm of the view that today's consultative process is well targeted as it seeks to draw input early from the attorneys general, from the very people who in the end will have the final word on whether a member state should domesticate the model law or not, and how it should domesticate it. So this consultative process, early in the process, will therefore help to clear any legal bottlenecks which could arise and which could have the potential to slow down the domestication process once adopted. In light of the above, allow me, on behalf of the Pan-African Lawyers Union, to appreciate the efforts of the SADC Parliamentary Forum in ensuring that the process of finalizing the model law is inclusive by opening it up to various stakeholders. It is gratifying to note that the Parliamentary Forum is living up to its mandate, both as one of the pillars and also as a custodian of a democratic culture in the Southern African region. To the participants, I implore each one of you to actively participate in the deliberations today. The fact that you're coming from different legal jurisdictions, different legal systems, and different legal traditions should act as a motivation for you to listen to one another and to learn from one another and to enrich this process and to draw lessons and best practices from one another. I see this model law as helping us to curb the challenges we've been having of excessive budget deficits, of uncontrolled supplementary expenditure, of increasing debt, just to name a few, and also as an important tool to combat corruption, once domesticated by the member states. On our part, as PALU and as the Stop the Bleeding Consortium, we assure you that we will continue to engage in the various deliberations and validations, including the ones set aside for civil society, till final adoption of this model law, and also working with the member states in its domestication. Finally, I wish to underscore that in my view, this model law is unique in the whole world. It will continue the pioneering path and the trend-setting path that the SADC Parliamentary Forum has undertaken for the last 2 decades. My sister, your Secretary General, Boemo, will tell you that slightly more than a decade ago, the SADC Parliamentary Forum was the pioneer in enacting a model law on HIV/AIDS. Thereafter, your sister, the East African Legislative Assembly, followed in your footsteps by enacting a regional law on HIV/AIDS. I am persuaded that this will be repeated. In the years to come, the SADC region will be commended for this pioneering ambition in the form of harmonized regional standards on public financial management, which will provide an example for other regions of the continent and for other parts of the world. The model law will truly mark history, and your contributions of today will accordingly have worldwide ramifications and echo in all the 4 corners of the globe. As PALU, I can assure you that as soon as you adopt this model law, we will share the good news with the other regional economic communities and with the African Union, especially with its specialized technical committee on finance, monetary affairs, economic planning, and integration, which is the Ministerial Committee for Finance at a continental level. Mr. Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, with these hopeful words, allow me to wish you fruitful deliberations and I thank you for all your attention.
Thank you very much. I can see the SG nodding in appreciation of your kind words, sir. Thank you very much, Mr. Don Dea, the Chief Executive Officer of the Pan-African Lawyers Union, PALU. And we receive the greetings from the Pan-African Lawyers Union. And we take your words very serious, sir, that we really need to work towards the domestication of these model laws. And especially this one, which is taking into account the international best practices and also the regional and international protocols. So if we domesticate it, then in a way, we are also domesticating some of the regional and international protocols that our respective countries are party to. And you also appreciated the inclusiveness of the process in which this model law was developed, and also reiterated your desire and expectation to see this inclusive process being carried forward as we finalize this model law. And I agree with you, this model law will also assist member states to manage some of the fiscal challenges that we've been facing, including, but not limited to, rising debt, fiscal deficits, corruption, among other things. And we wish to congratulate the SADC PF, the Secretary General, and the member states for pioneering and trend setting, just as you have alluded to. Madam Secretary General, congratulations. You have been setting the trend in the region. Thank you very much, sir, for those words. And without much further ado, if we can proceed with our program. I'm not sure if other member states have also managed to join us. Do we have any representation from the countries who were not present when others introduced themselves? Anyone who has joined us? Anyone who has joined after introductions? Do we have representation from Angola, the DRC, Eswatini, Lesotho, Madagascar, Mauritius, Mozambique, Namibia, Seychelles, South Africa, and finally Zimbabwe. So we proceed. I think we still have representation from the countries that were there when we did our introductions. At this moment in time, I'll call upon our ICT team to play a video clip. Let's pay particular attention to this video clip that also speaks to why we are here and some of the issues that we also need to take note as we discuss the Sadc model law on public finance management. ICT guys, I hand over this time to you.
This is not about a campaign against multinationals just blankly. We would like to see clean businesses who come here, pay their taxes when they work with us. The idea of reporting all their profit in a small headquarters where there are only 2 or 3 people working there and overlooking the entire operation, which is 60–70% of it is happening in this continent, we would like that to stop.
Curtail abusive transfer pricing, for example, trade misinvoicing, for example. There's a lot of work that remains to be done.
We must indeed achieve the objective of stopping the bleeding, of retaining these resources on the continent, which are illicitly flowing out of the continent.
These scenes are not so dissimilar to one that happens every day across the African continent. A businessman goes into a bank and makes a transfer of funds to an offshore company. Little questions are asked and millions are funneled out of the country electronically in a matter of minutes to a territory where little or no tax is accrued. This scenario is also surprisingly legal. A senior government minister collaborates with a mineral company executive to stash money and profits earned illegally in a foreign bank. A woman gives $5,000 to a man in the hopes to get her whole family across the border illegally. This is a human trafficker. He deposits the money in an overseas bank where it is cleaned and legitimized. All these are examples of illicit financial flows, or IFFs. Money leaving the continent, being funneled into international, global, already developed capitals and depriving African national economies of vital liquidity and resources. The campaign to stem IFFs, or previously termed capital flight, is by no means a new phenomenon and has recently received a boost by the revelation of the Panama Papers, an unprecedented leak of over 11 million files detailing wealthy individuals and numerous multinationals exploiting secretive offshore tax regimes has elevated the issues of illicit flows to the forefront of the global agenda and media scrutiny. The establishment of the high-level panel represented a watershed and new strategy to combat the illicit flows.
All started on a Sunday in Malawi. We were preparing for the opening of the African Ministers of Finance, Planning and Economic Development Conference in 2010. The room was full. We were really surprised with the response. And those who attended, they said, no, this has to go to the ministerial proper the following day. And we had a 2 hours discussion on it. And African Ministers of Finance, in their wisdom, they said, no, this is a development issue that is too important for the continent. We cannot allow this continent, the poor part of the world, to subsidize the rich part.
I sometimes refer to it as being like a hydra with many heads. And a strange hydra, when you cut some heads, by the time you get to the 7th head, the first one has regrown. It's so dynamic, it keeps on changing shape and form. So we have to be resolved to the fact that we will always be chasing, finding out new ways of illicit financial flow and trying to deal with them. That's the first thing.
GFI analyzes illicit financial flows, not only out of Africa, but out of other parts of the world as well. We did a study of illicit money going out of Africa. We were asked by UNECA to come and discuss it. We did so. This is going back 5 or 6 years now. UNECA was frankly fascinated with our analysis that the commercial component of illicit financial flows is bigger than the corrupt component of illicit financial flows. Because, quite honestly, the media had been, for years, enjoying its criticism of Africa for the amount of corrupt money that is going out. So we came along and said, yes, corruption's a problem, but the biggest part of this is commercial.
According to GFI, these are the 3 clear definitions of IFF as seen before earlier: corruption, criminal, and the commercial aspect. The estimated 50 to 80 billion US dollars that the African continent loses annually in illicit flows is about double that what the continent receives in ODA or official development assistance. Moreover, based on the methodology of the Economic Commission for Africa, abusive transfer pricing and misinvoicing, the underreporting of amounts produced and profits made are another major source of commercial illicit funds lost forever.
When we then presented our report to the African heads of state and government, they adopted the report in full, adopted the recommendations that we had made, and then decided as African heads of state and government to follow up on the implementation of what had been the recommendations, which had then been adopted as decisions of the AU summit.
There has been a confluence of forces that have really given this a boost, and also, as you know very well, the birth of this was looking for how the continent can finance itself. And one of the immediate low-hanging fruits was the issue of illicit financial flows out of Africa. So I think it's firstly therefore leadership, secondly circumstance, and thirdly the strategy brought to this by the ECA.
So it's been an exciting work, and the whole purpose is to promote African development. And how do you promote it? There has to be resources. It's resource mobilization. And in that regard, what are the obstacles to resource mobilization? And one of the obstacles is illicit financial flows from the continent.
There is really nowhere else on the continent where there is a plug-in for policy and legislative shifts that we need to make on the continent to defend our outflows, other than currently the high-level panel. And they're doing a tremendous job because they've gone from beyond the report and letting it gather dust in somebody's office, but also looking at the systemic work that needs to be done, work with regards to policy and policy shifts, both at the Ministry of Finance level, as well as bringing in civil society and regional organizations to make the necessary policy shifts that we require. It's good work that they do.
Even before the Panama Papers, they have managed to elevate the issue of international financial flows, at least, or illicit financial flows from Africa, at least, into an international issue. It's a global challenge also. So they anticipated the Panama Papers. Perhaps they'll be similar in future, but already the work of the panel has already put this into the fore, has already elevated this into a global issue, a global challenge, something requiring global action.
Illicit flows have steadily increased over the years in scale and magnitude, and fundamentally undermine our ability on the continent to achieve our sustainable development goals, impede transparency, and risks further increasing inequality and poverty. The campaign to stem IFFs is now galvanized under a wider context, incorporating an array of actors from civil society, tax and governance advocates, and government and parliamentarians.
We wanted it on the global agenda. It is now on the global agenda. So there are many people who are part of this campaign to stop the continent bleeding of these resources. So it's governments, it's civil society, it's business, it's everybody.
Our role we see as bringing the interests of citizens on the table to ensure that the design of policies that will ultimately curtail illicit financial flows and ensure domestic resource mobilization are policies that are not also at the same time leading to increased inequality and having a situation where it's already the poor that are already carrying the burden that are going to suffer out of that. And for that to happen, you need to have civil society organizations in the room to create that critical mass of actors to be able to again, demand that the politicians and the governments actually fulfill their commitments, honor their commitments in terms of what they have said they are planning to do to curb illicit financial flows.
Firstly, do you even know that there's IFFs? And if you do, what does that mean to you as a political party? In election campaigns, in parties that are in parliament, because we just say MPs, some come from ruling parties, some from opposition. Those that are in ruling parties, how are you influencing your own ruling party in terms of IFF? But more so because parliamentarians get a budget for constituencies. Are you taking this as an issue at constituency level, where you are saying in terms of mobilization, how do I take this message and explain it to an ordinary African? I mean, Panama Papers came for Africa, we say they came, they are gone. For most African communities, it has meant nothing. People don't even know what that is. So we are saying at APNIFT, it is your role as an MP to take this message to that lower level, because these are the people that vote and keep governments afloat. If they're not empowered to know what is going on, they are never going to hold governments accountable.
Accountability is also in need of another key building block to fight illicit flows: capacity. Capacity building of appropriate institutions across the continent is key to improving skills and enforcing financial retention.
We begin to see that capacity challenges or the lack of capacity is a critical issue for combating illicit financial flows and stopping the bleeding. In particular, one area where African countries have big problem is actually implementing the legislations and the laws that they have for for money laundering and for corruption and for all kinds of activities, illegal outflow of funds. And so we're working very hard to strengthen these institutions so that they can become more effective in dealing with these issues, and they become better coordinated in terms of what they do.
A clear metric on the success of tracking illicit flows is also its subsequent retrieval. Headway has now been made in a number of countries, generating repatriation of funds and the curtailment of aggressive tax avoidance regimes.
But we need even improvements to track it better. Better accounting and international accounting standards, better capacity with customs officials, better capacity in drawing agreements and other things. I mean, even just identifying or tracking will take some effort.
Uganda recently won an international court case against a British oil company, and as a result of that case, gathered $423 million in income that they would have lost did they not have a capital gains tax policy and law in Uganda. Many African countries do not have that. And because Uganda had that law, they were able to go to international arbitration, win the case, and now have that income.
The cumulative effect of strengthening financial architecture, challenging banking secrecy, and reforming common tax orthodoxy reduces outflows and critically increases income on the continent. As the fight to stem illicit flows continues, the policy and legislative shifts being implemented by the panel will inevitably need to adapt to future innovative and more clandestine methods of outflows, preempting a drive to shift not only the legal structures, but also an overall moral offensive on IFFs and their consequences.
You know for a fact that basically everybody in the world is going to disapprove. It might be legal, but if it's immoral, and people understand what that immorality means in practical terms. But secondly, I think there's much greater commitment among governments throughout the world that where legislation doesn't exist, it must be passed. Where it exists, it must be enforced. That you need all of these agreements and benchmarks, standards and all that to ensure that you have both you can have moral motivation, please act correctly, but you must also have the law on your side to say those who don't act correctly, then the law can act against them. So that you see even the definition of what's illicit in terms of the law, as people understand the loopholes and so on, and the impact, the negative impact of these illicit flows in terms of the quality of the lives of many, many people.
Indeed, it's a very powerful video. Indeed, Africa is losing a lot through illicit financial flows. And indeed, we are depriving our generations and future generations of the much needed resources that are being shipped out, and very small amounts coming back as official development assistance. And indeed, it takes us and only us to stop these illicit financial flows. And one way, as has been rightly put by Honorable His Excellency Thabo Mbeki, is to come up with robust legislation, not only to fight IFFs, but also to define what we mean by IFFs so that we are able to fight this. And part of this is what we are doing today. We've come up with a model law, the Public Finance Management Act, with a view to strengthen the regional public finance management legislation. And we are gathered here, honorables, Madam Secretary General, to consult the Attorney General's offices on the Sadc model law that has been developed by the Sadc PF. And as we move forward, I now call upon Mr. Daniel Greenberg, the legal drafter of this model law. Mr. Greenberg is a barrister specializing in legislation in the legislative process, and he is currently serving as a counsel for domestic legislation in the House of Commons, and also serving as a general editor of Westlaw UK for Thomson & Reuters. He has a law degree from Cambridge University, England, and has over 30 years experience in legislative drafting and the machinery of government. He has drafted legislation as set out in the lists that are attached in his enormous curriculum vitae, and he has worked with the governments and parliaments in UK, Albania, Wales, Myanmar, Malaysia, Nigeria, among a host of other countries on the production of legislation and on legislative development process. Mr. Greenberg has extensive experience as detailed in his, like I said, CV, and he has experience in training, in teaching legislative drafting skills, including intra-government and external consultation processes. and he writes on legislation and the machinery of government issues. I will not exhaust everything about Mr. Greenberg, but suffice to say that I will invite Mr. Greenberg to now take us through this Sadc model law on public finance management. And honorable participants, you are reminded to take your pictures as you participate in this meeting, and you can share those pictures on our social media handles. And you can tag the pictures using the hashtag Sadc model law on PFM, or hashtag efficiency in PFM, or you can also tag the Sadc PF. Mr. Greenberg, the time is yours now, sir.
Thank you very much, honourable and distinguished facilitator. Grateful to you and grateful to honourable and distinguished Madame Secretary General for her opening remarks, and to the honourable and distinguished keynote speaker for his introduction to today's proceedings. In a few moments, I will share my screen and take us through some salient aspects of the model law on which we look forward to receiving the comments and steers of the distinguished participants in today's consultative forum. But before I do so, I should like to draw esteemed colleagues' attention to two fundamental principles that underpin the approach we have taken to the preparation of this model law. First, as with all legislative drafting, with which esteemed colleagues present this morning are very familiar, there is the need to strike a balance between competing and often conflicting desiderata. In this respect, I draw the attention of distinguished and esteemed colleagues to 5 particular balances that we have tried to strike and need to strike in the context of this model law. First, there is the need to combine simplicity and certainty. As we heard in the interviews in the video clip just shown by the Secretariat, if model law is to be effective in combating illicit financial flows, in helping to control sovereign debt, and in all the other financial issues to which it is addressed, it is vital that it should be simple, that it should be capable of being understood and applied simply and effectively by the professionals at whom it is aimed. And to that extent, it requires to be based on clear and simple principles that are set out in the legislation, without complexity being allowed to shroud and obscure those fundamental concepts. But at the same time, this needs to be sufficiently certain. It has to descend to a level of detail at which ministries and others involved in the public financial management system can get clear and certain answers to their real day-to-day questions. So it has to strike a balance between adumbrating simple principles and giving certain answers at a level of detail. Secondly, it has to balance accessibility against accuracy. I note with particular pleasure that our consultative forums are open to the public and are being live streamed and are being therefore attended virtually by a range of civil society actors, but also by members of the citizenry at whom these laws are really aimed. Because it is necessary for effective public financial management law to be felt owned by the citizen, who will then become engaged with it, who will support it, and every citizen needs to feel that this model law is relevant to her or his life. Distinguished delegates, at one of the consultative forums a few weeks ago, we saw a different video clip containing interviews with those who live in rule of law societies, but are not part of the rule of law mechanism themselves. We heard from a number of young members of different SADC jurisdictions, and they expressed a surprising, to me, degree of interest in the complexities of public financial management. And one young woman in particular struck me when she said that she wanted to feel confident that monies being raised by her and her peer group were being applied in a way that was relevant to their world. She raised particular doubts about infrastructure expenditure and its relevance to those who inhabited particular areas of her country. And it seems to me, in striking a balance between accessibility and accuracy in the presentation of this model law, it's very important that citizens like that young woman, that every citizen feels that the mechanisms of public financial management are not meant to keep this some sort of a technical secret which citizens cannot share in, but that exactly the reverse. They are designed for transparency and citizen engagement. And they are designed to give confidence to the citizen that this is something being done for their well-being. But at the same time, this has to be a technically accurate document aimed at financial professionals. It has to use technical language where it is addressing a key target audience of a technical nature. It has to use accurate terms of accountancy, of procurement, of public sector management, and it has to be an accurate reflection of the complexities of public service in the financial sector. Third, and arising out of these first two balances, we need to be clear, the model law needs to be clear, and it needs to draw clear and, as we said, certain distinctions, but it also has to be flexible. Because if this is a snapshot, if this model law is allowed to become a snapshot of how the world required public financial regulation in February 2022, it is doomed to instant obsolescence. Madam Secretary General drew attention to the existence of a technical working group that has steered and guided the preparation of this model law. and which includes, as well as our distinguished facilitator today, it includes a range of public financial professionals from the SADC region and from around the world. And they have drawn attention particularly to the need to include matters on which regulation can only be skeletal today. I refer to honourable delegates for a particular example, which I will expound shortly, to part 12 of the law, which deals with crypto assets. The regulation of crypto assets and cryptocurrencies in particular is something about which it is difficult to say very much today, because in its practicalities, it is in its infancy, but it is becoming of increasing importance. There are central banks in different countries around the world that are already contemplating, and in one or two cases have already announced, the issue of government cryptocurrencies. And there is no jurisdiction today that can ignore crypto assets in its public financial management, because there will be no jurisdiction where sovereign debt, state-owned enterprises, or other aspects of the PFMA, the public financial management system, are able to remain entirely separate from and are not directly exposed to cryptocurrency risks and cryptocurrency valuations. So part 12 of the model law tries to balance, again, the need to be clear about how crypto assets are to be drawn within the PFMA framework, with flexibility to adapt to real-world changes in the forthcoming years and indeed decades. We have, to that effect, drawn on principles, enduring principles in relation to virtual and crypto assets, drawn from the London School of Economics and Political Science, Institute of Global Affairs, Basic Principles for Regulating Crypto Assets, fourth draft. But we have gone beyond that, and we have provided, against a regulatory principle backdrop, the flexibility to adapt through subordinate legislation subject to parliamentary scrutiny and control to develop cryptocurrency classification, regulation, and valuation in the light of real-world developments. Then we have to balance a principle-based approach for the reasons given to meet simplicity and accessibility and clarity, and we have to balance that against enforceability, an issue as to which distinguished delegates today will have particular interest and will be able to provide particular advice. This does have to be a principled approach. It does have to speak, as was mentioned in the video clip that we just saw, it does have to speak to the morality and responsibility of individual public servants. But it has to go beyond that, because there will be public servants who do not rise to that challenge to behave morally and to demonstrate their responsibility. And we have to know, and the citizens have to know, that the principles and the obligations of the model law are directly enforceable in such circumstances. So we have included specific offences of misuse of public funds, of maladministration, and I will draw your attention to those when we come to them in the context of the model law. The second point I wish to make by way of introduction is that we have to deal with different constitutional and legislative balances in different SADC states. And the model law is aware that, for example, some constitutions deal at a level of considerable detail with the Auditor General, establishment, status, and powers. Other constitutions say less. And that is true about a number of the topics dealt with by the model law. We have therefore had to adopt a modular approach that will allow domestication by individual jurisdictions to reflect the provisions of their own constitution so as to avoid overlap and so as to guard against conflict. In a number of places, the model law alludes to this necessity by footnotes that draw particular attention to the possibility of constitutional or other legislative overlap and invites the domesticating authorities to take the appropriate action to avoid conflict. With those two introductory remarks, I will now share my screen and invite the Secretariat to confirm that participants are now able to see the draft model law on my screen. Would the Secretariat be kind enough to confirm that?
Yes, Dr. Greenberg. Yeah.
Thank you. I start with part 2, where we set out the aims and objectives of the public financial management system. And in the light of my introductory remarks, distinguished delegates will not be surprised to see that we enshrine the principles of accountability, transparency, independence, and modernity in a purpose clause at the beginning of the Act. And I stress to distinguished colleagues today that this is not in the preamble, although the preamble also includes corresponding material. This is an operative provision by way of a purpose clause to which the courts will give the standard operative effect and weight that they give to purpose clauses, and it is to be understood as sounding in administrative law to that extent and for that purpose. I note in passing that in accordance with what I said about the citizenry involvement, it deals with raising of revenue, but it is also about accountability, transparency, independence, and modernity in relation to expenditure, as well as accounting and, of course, parliamentary oversight. By way of affecting the balance between the principled approach and the need for citizenship, ownership, and engagement, Clause 10 requires public officials to aim towards some stated objectives, and it then requires the executive to establish a scheme for measuring success in traveling towards those objectives. Optimization of revenue and expenditure, the elimination of unauthorized expenditure, sustainability, and parliamentary accountability and oversight are all capable of being measured by objective benchmark schemes that can test success and demonstrate success to the citizenry. It is also important that those benchmarks will inform the reporting and recording functions under specific provisions of the Act. Clause 11 articulates public financial management principles that the courts, again, as operative provisions, will use in construing and applying the later provisions of the law. The transparency principle, the accountability and participation principle, formal and meaningful opportunities for public engagement with a specific mention for inclusion of the most disadvantaged. the Oversight Principle, that all the overseeing institutions, including Parliament, the National Audit Office, and other regulatory bodies, will have the necessary resources, powers, and processes to provide that independent oversight in an effective way. And finally, the responsibility principle I mentioned before, that has to be weighed against and supported by enforceable offences, which we will come to later. And finally, values. We articulate on the face of the model law the public financial management values of integrity, independence, impartiality, equity, professionalism, accountability, and responsiveness. And we place a duty on public officials who are exercising functions under the model law to aim constantly to demonstrate that they apply those values in the performance of their functions. In terms of flexibility in relation to the Constitution, Clause 13 makes express provision of the kind that I alluded to earlier about the need not to overlap with the Constitution and to fit with the Constitution and other relevant legislation. Part 3 lists the principal authorities involved in the administration of the public financial management system: the finance minister, the permanent finance secretary, with detailed functions of the permanent finance secretary, including powers of inspection internally, the role of the finance ministry with its general functions, which again will be tailored to individual jurisdictions, accounting officers within each public official unit with their specific functions to be addressed. And the Auditor General is mentioned briefly because that office is addressed in more detail later in the model law. Part 4 deals with the fundamental components of the public fund aspect of the public financial management: the consolidated fund, other accounts, retention accounts, trading accounts, debt servicing account. And we were asked at one of the earlier consultative meetings to consider saying more about special funds here, and we will take that away and consider it. Excuse me. I pause here to note that in a number of places, the draft places a duty on the executive to make subordinate legislation, regulations, in relation to a range of matters that require greater detail in order to combine certainty and flexibility, to make the model law ambulatory and capable of meeting the challenges of the years ahead. In some respects, consultative forums have raised doubts as to whether in all of those cases it is appropriate for the minister to be making regulations. For example, the Auditors General, when consulted, the Auditors General felt that regulations relating to their procedures and processes still needed to be independent from the executive. The question arises, therefore, of course, who can make those regulations, and can we strengthen the parliamentary oversight to give a sufficient guarantee of independence? And that is a matter that we have agreed to take away and consider further. Part 5 adumbrates the standard supply and appropriation system that operates in all SADC systems. Part 6 says the same about parliamentary control under the umbrella of a separate parliamentary engagement principle, encouraging Parliament to use the full range of mechanisms available to it for overseeing, controlling the public financial management process. In a number of places in Part 6, the model law stresses the importance of self-regulation by the national parliaments in accordance with their own standing orders. there is nothing in the model law that is or should be prescriptive of how national parliaments choose to operate. And it is very important, therefore, that the model law expressly subordinates itself to the standing orders and other arrangements of each parliament and legislative body. Subject to that, the part makes provision about the role of the Auditor General, the independence in the appointment of the Auditor General, so that the Auditor General can represent a genuinely impartial and independent voice. There is a specific duty that sounds in administrative law in clause 37 for public authorities, including ministers, to recognize and respect the accountability and independence of the Auditor General, and the same will flow through to the National Audit Office in clause 40. Special mention is made of the Public Accounts Committee, and we consulted parliamentary committees, including the Public Accounts Committees, a few days ago. Part 7 deals with the budget, structure and process, and the parliamentary control of the annual appropriation system. We allow for violence. We allow for in-year variations. We allow for future year variations because we have to be flexible as well as being certain. But violence within the model law is not a free-for-all. It's not, yes, these are controls within the budget, but if you wish to circumvent them, then just use violence. It's about recognizing the flexibilities and creating parameters for controlling and reflecting their own exigencies in a way that allows flexibility without completely undermining or inappropriately diluting the fundamental principles and components of the model law. We make specific provision about the adequacy of the budget debate and consultation, and again, with a very significant move towards citizen engagement, as well as engagement, effective engagement by all public authorities and civil society bodies. There is a series of requirements for specific accompanying documentation, objectives, sustainable fiscal policy, sustainable development goals, international commitments, which our distinguished honourable facilitator mentioned specifically in his opening remarks. Equality and diversity, to be at the heart of the public financial management system, again, so that citizens know that wherever they sit within the social structures of the jurisdiction, their fair and equitable treatment and their equality of opportunity is at the heart of the consideration of financial matters by the Parliament. And again, past year and future year implications, as well as multi-year budget projections, and a public debt statement forming a core component of the budget documents. In-year developments I have alluded to, similarly for delays and pre-budget expenditure. Part 8 deals with government borrowing in broadest terms, sovereign debt, which was mentioned by the distinguished keynote speaker. Sovereign debt is treated as a separate component here of the Public Financial Management Act. Again, in some jurisdictions, it will already have its own legislation against which this can be benchmarked. Classification to ensure sufficient breadth to cover all aspects of sovereign debt. A strategy, committees, leading up to the fundamental powers and duties, including a general authority to borrow within borrowing arrangements approved by the minister or the finance ministry. Arrangements for government securities, including including a registration system and express recognition at the suggestion of the technical working group of on-lending as a particular issue within the debt envelope. Guarantees and indemnities similar. Control of the nature of debt, transparency and accountability through statements that work through the committee structure and, as we just saw, are built into the budget process with a constant rolling public debt schedule. Ceiling limits that do not prevent borrowing above them, but indicate where they are reached, the need for specific excess reports, scrutiny and control to ensure that excessive debt is handled and addressed in an appropriate way. Procurement and use of public resources is dealt with in Part 9 in accordance with principles that will be familiar to distinguished delegates. Again, at the specific suggestion of the technical working group, flexibility is provided for by an express reference to the need to vary procurement in cases of emergency, but not to abandon the procurement principles altogether. Part 10 deals with public accounts and public accounting. It deals with it on a resource account basis, not on a cash accounting basis. In relation to illicit financial flows, it is particularly important that more than cash is followed, that resources are properly understood and accounted for and tracked, and that the resource accounts are scrutinized by the Auditor General arrangements. For the same reason, whole of government accounts are taken as the norm, and there are powers to acquire information sufficient to produce full whole of government accounts. Part 11, to which I alluded earlier, deals with financial misconduct, misuse and maladministration. Public financial misconduct is made a criminal offence with penalties left to be decided in a proportionate and coherent way within each jurisdiction's penal regime. Misuse of public funds is similarly made an offence. Maladministration is not made a separate criminal offence, but in order to address the evidential difficulties as well as the well-known enforcement difficulties in relation to the offences of misconduct and misuse, maladministration is introduced as permitting reports of these independent bodies and investigations or inquiries established by the executive, permitting those reports to identify failures by public officials, and those failures are not criminal offences and do not lead directly to criminal sanctions, although they could, of course, inform a prosecution for a pre-existing offence, either under the model law or under some other law, but they can lead to disqualification for certain kinds of public office, which, being a privilege, can be withdrawn in accordance with the system set out in clause 113. Part 12, dealing with cryptocurrencies, I have spoken about at some length, and I draw attention in passing merely to the principles of engagement, classification, which is of course one of the biggest problems, consumer and investor protection, which is of course one of the greatest aims, cryptography and technology, and constancy in the approach towards the inclusion of cryptocurrencies and the preparation of a virtual currency strategy. I come finally to draw distinguished delegates' attention to two aspects of the final part: the power to issue supplementary regulations, which supplement individual regulation making powers that permeate the model law in the way that we have described, and the power to give guidance. and the power for the executive to give guidance in relation to matters of administrative process or procedure in a way that enhances the clarity and certainty for the citizen in the execution of the model law, subject always to the control of Parliament, as well as consultation with a range of authorities, but scrutiny and control of Parliament is at the heart of the quasi-legislative policy and also at the heart of the subordinate legislation policy, as set out in clauses 130 to 132. I hope that I have given distinguished delegates an overview of some of the features of the model law on which we particularly welcome your advice and guidance, and I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daniel Greenberg, our legal drafter. Having had an inspiring welcome address from Madam Secretary General and a very powerful keynote address from the Chief Executive Officer of the Pan-African Lawyers Union, now we have had chance to listen to some key aspects of the model law. We now open the floor for debate, inputs, suggestions on the draft model law. Honorable Attorney Generals, it's now time for all the participants to make an input into or interventions for consideration in finalizing this model law on public finance management. I open the floor now. Can you show your intention to speak by raising of hands, and the Secretariat will assist me in identifying those who have raised their hands. Distinguished participants, the floor is now open. Can we show by raising of hands? And we request that for the purposes of the video recording, you also unmute your video as you speak. Hello, can you hear me? Anybody to open the floor for us in terms of commenting or making an intervention on the draft model law? In that case, perhaps we'll go country by country so that you also make your interventions. And Botswana being the first on the alphabetical order for the participating countries today, I hand over the time to Botswana if you have any comments or interventions. Botswana.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yes.
Please proceed.
I was going to comment a little bit later because mine is on special funds to allow the participants to comment on the first parts of the model bylaws. Is that okay?
Mr. Greenberg, is it okay that we can take comments, even those that relate to the area that she raised? I'm sure we can just record it down and you can comment rather than us going through section by section or starting from the top going down. If participants are willing to comment on any section, be it the last section or any other section that is not included in the model law, if it's okay that we go that route.
I think that will be the most convenient method of proceeding.
Thank you. So Botswana, you can proceed. It's okay.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad that someone raised the issue of special funds, because I think over the years, they've been subjected to maladministration and mismanagement. We have seen how, they have been used for, the money and the funds have been used for unintended purposes. Like normally the fund order will state the purposes for which the money should be used for, but we have seen how, fund administrators have used the money for unintended purposes. We have seen the delays or the unexplained delays, in the submission of audited accounts, and certain provisions of fund orders have been said to be unclear, leading to various interpretations. So it's very important that while we are, working on the it's very important that as we review our primary legislation, we should also pay attention to our subsidiary legislation, especially fund orders, so that our fund orders, our subsidiaries is aligned with the Public Finance Management Act. Is also reviewed, to ensure prudent financial management of resources, anti-money laundering, ensure that anti-money laundering and counter financing of terrorism standards and laws. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I didn't realize that I was muted. Thank you very much for that input. Mr. Greenberg, perhaps you may want to come in to respond or to seek clarification.
Yes, I will simply say that I respectfully agree with all that the Honourable Delegate from Botswana has so kindly said. And I indicated before that we are taking away the issue of special funds for further consideration. If she would be kind enough to consider making a short written submission on the particular aspects of control that require to be maintained in relation to special funds, we will be particularly grateful for that and will include it in our consideration.
Thank you very much, Madam. If you can make a written submission on special funds, then that can be incorporated. Any more comments or suggestions from Botswana or any other participant relating to the issue of special funds? And Madam, from Botswana, are we done, or you still have more comments on different issues altogether?
For now, we are done.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We proceed to Malawi. Malawi, any comments?
No comment at the moment.
Thank you. Then we proceed to distinguished participants from the United Republic of Tanzania. Any comments?
Thank you. No comments for now, for the moment.
Thank you. Looks like it's going to be one of the shortest meetings. We proceed to Zambia. Distinguished participants from Zambia. Interventions, comments?
Thank you, Chair. Not necessarily a comment, but just to commend
the doctor, we noted that the use of cryptocurrency, that is digital and virtual currency, has also been considered under the model law, and we just wanted to commend and support that. I thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment on cryptocurrencies, which I think is an emerging issue, and which I think most of our public finance management acts in our respective countries do not mention or consider, because it's a fairly new concept, and we will learn from this model law as we domesticate it. Any more comments, participants? The floor is open for any interventions. I'm not sure if other participants from the other 11 countries have joined in.
Yes, Chair.
Yes, Madam, please proceed.
Yes, no, I just wanted to say we have no comment at this point from Namibia.
Oh, Namibia. Thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Namibia. Any other
Thank you, Chair.
Any other participants who have joined?
May I? Chair, yes, if I may comment a bit from Tanzania.
Please proceed. Please proceed.
Thank you. I don't know if it's from, I think it's from a drafting point of view, from a drafter's point of view. I understand, and as was submitted, that part of the set of provisions will go on to respective independent legislations, like the part governing the government borrowing and the likes. We have an independent legislation to that effect. But my concern was for other matters that are interlinked to the public, to this model law, matters concerning, for instance, anti-money laundering and the provisions of the like. Are we going to have provisions in the model law that link, or sort of like link with those specific legislations, or will not have them in this particular set of legislation to have a connection? Because otherwise, I'm failing to see provisions within this set of legislation, within this model law, that will address money laundering issues from a public finance point of view. I don't know if I'm understood on that. Thank you.
Yes, I completely take the point, and there will be, as the Honourable Delegate says, there will be a number of topics: money laundering, bribery and corruption, funding of terrorism was mentioned by another speaker. There will be a number of areas of law that do require to be supported by and therefore reflected in the model law as it is domesticated. Necessarily, every jurisdiction is going to have its own particular arrangements for those matters. The criminal law, for example, in relation to money laundering, may have its own proceeds of crime legislation. It isn't possible in the model law to be prescriptive about how to reflect the complexities of each jurisdiction's law about legislation about these particular matters in the PFMA system. So my answer is that yes, all these matters will need to be addressed as part of the domestication process, and appropriate cross-references will need to be inserted during the domesticating legislation. I would say to the Honourable Delegate from Tanzania that if there are specific aspects of other areas of law in respect of which he feels the model law should be making express provision, whether money laundering or others, again, if he could indicate, perhaps in a written submission very kindly, how far he thinks the model law can sensibly go in that direction without interfering with the structure of the substantive law on those matters in each jurisdiction, that is something that we would very much like to take away and consider in the light of his observations.
Thank you for that response, Mr. Greenberg. The distinguished participant from the United Republic of Tanzania, any follow-up?
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I take note of the request, and we will, when required to do so, we'll give our submission on areas that we feel that it needs to be considered. And as far as money laundering and other criminal-related provision matters, so long as it provides a convergence point to the public finance management. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Participants, you can also use our chat platform to send in your interventions, your comments, your suggestions, and we'll read them through. Meanwhile, the floor is still open for any interventions. Any interventions, distinguished participants?
Muito bom dia.
Yes.
Muito bom dia, vou falar em português.
Thank you, please proceed.
Sim, vou falar em português, sou moçambicana, procuradora da República de Primeira, estou aqui em representação da Procuradora-Geral da República de Moçambique. Apenas a minha intervenção é para felicitar ao redator e toda a equipe de elaboração desta lei, dizer que nós, como Ministério Público, vamos, portanto, apreciar melhor a lei e olhar para a questão da responsabilização e sancionamento da má gestão de fundos públicos ou má utilização de fundos públicos, porque, na verdade, a nossa intervenção é relativamente à responsabilização e o sancionamento. Eu penso que esta lei vai ser útil para nós, vai enriquecer aquilo que é a nossa atuação como Ministério Público na questão de finanças públicas. Muito obrigada.
Mr. Greenberg, I hope you captured that.
On behalf, if I may, of the team, we're very grateful for the expression of support, and we look forward very much to receiving the observations of the distinguished Attorney General of Mozambique in relation to sanctions and implementation of sanctions in relation to public financial management.
Thank you very much, Honorable distinguished participant from Mozambique, for your intervention. Any more interventions? Distinguished participants, the floor is still open for any comments, any suggestions, any interventions. and we have our legal drafter, Mr. Greenberg, to respond to some of those issues. And where we feel you can do a better job by submitting a written submission, I think, again, it's still open. You can send in your written submission. And those who feel they can utilize the chat platform to send in their comments, again, it's open. You can send in your comments or suggestions through the chat platform so that we can read them. We are waiting for those with comments or suggestions to show by way of raising their hands.
Chair?
Yes, please proceed.
Yeah, I wish to understand concerning the panel provisions. From the submissions that they were left for inclusion, I believe, by member states, depending on their structure, depending on the jurisdictional structures, so to speak. But I wanted to understand from the model law point of view, how will they be incorporated, or how will they remain blank as such? I'm a bit unclear on that. Thank you.
My preference would be for them to remain blank, because I doubt the ability of the SADC jurisdictions together to be able to identify a single set of penal provisions that will produce a proportionate and effective response coherently within each jurisdiction's arrangements. But if the honourable delegate from Tanzania feels that is a policy of cowardice, and that we should go further and try to strike a balance with some default provisions on penalties, then I will be enormously grateful for any suggestions that he and his colleagues may have as to where we should start. The problem that distinguished delegates this morning will be more familiar with than me is that proportionality has to be at the heart of penal policy, and proportionality is inherently territorially contextual.
Thank you very much. I hope you have been, I hope the response satisfies you, the Honorable Delegate from Tanzania. If you have any follow-up.
Indeed, it does. Thank you, Chair. Indeed, it does. Definitely, it's not cowardice for not having them. Of course, it takes premise that it being a model law, and then the strike of balance that it looks to doing. Other than if you have the penal provisions, then definitely it will have an unstarter kind of setup. So I understand it's okay from the model law point of view. It's appropriate to be silent. Thank you.
I think if I might just add one observation, Mr. Facilitator, if I might just add one observation in response to what has just been so helpfully raised by the Honourable Delegate from Tanzania. I think it serves an important purpose for the model law to have specific offences of misuse and misappropriation, even though we leave the penalties blank, because what it's doing is it's making it clear that these matters must not be left, for example, to internal disciplinary process, that these are not something that should be capable of being dealt with purely internally within a ministry, say, but that are matters that, in order to match international best practice should be criminalized, albeit that each jurisdiction will criminalize them in accordance with its own coherent penal policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see a hand from Harrison Olivia Ernest Andrianso. I hope I have pronounced your name correctly. Please proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Vous m'entendez? Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, please proceed.
Bonjour, chers collègues. Je suis, comme vous l'avez prononcé tout à l'heure, Gerson Olivier Ernest Anderson. Je suis le commissaire général du Trésor public près la Cour des comptes de la Cour suprême de Madagascar. Globalement, donc, je suis le procureur général près la Cour des comptes de Madagascar. Et d'abord, je tiens à vous transmettre donc les salutations de notre président et son souhait de voir un succès sur ce partage d'aujourd'hui. Globalement, je n'ai pas beaucoup de commentaires, mais juste sur le point 36, sur la nomination de l'auditeur général. Je crois qu'il faut tenir compte des caractères des institutions supérieures de contrôle, puisque nous savons tous qu'il y a les institutions supérieures de contrôle à caractère juridictionnel.
Ah bon? Le professeur Soriamo.
Oui.
Bien.
Thank you very much. Mr. Greenberg?
Oui.
I'm not quite sure if the question has finished.
Avant 2h30. Bon, très bien, parce que à 2h30, je serai pris. Mais ok, sur ce même numéro, n'est-ce pas? Très bien, merci.
Yeah, Ms. Greenberg is saying that.
Ram, kindly change the channel, please.
Hello, sir. I think you need to come in again. Mr. Greenberg didn't quite well.
I'm not clear whether the question is continuing or not.
Okay. Sir, are you done? Mr. Harrison Olivia Ernest.
Cantapam, eu release the chapter.
Could the English interpreter confirm whether the question has now been delivered, please?
Vous m'entendez?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, I shall content myself with saying I hear the point on clause 36, and we look forward to seeing any specific written observations that the Honourable Delegate, the Attorney General of Madagascar, may wish to submit in due course.
Thank you. There is a comment from Jerry in the chat platform. We're saying, are we supposed to take this model law template as it is, or should we use our in-house style and standard? I think we can also defer the question to our SG or anyone from the Sadc here.
Is Dr. Greenberg taking the response, or I should go ahead?
I've put a very basic response, Madam Secretary General, in the chat bar, and it is subject to your expansion and elucidation.
Okay. No, thank you very much, Director. Colleagues, the model law is not supposed to be taken hook, line, and sinker. We expect member states to adapt the model law to suit their own domestic provisions. And therefore, it is a benchmark, it's a yardstick with which you can look at to either reform your legislation or to, where relevant, be able to benchmark in terms of the progress that you may be making. And it is for that reason that we say it is a model, no more, no less. And therefore we have no jurisdiction over sovereign states. And that is why this will not dictate in terms of what you wish to take from the provisions of the model law. One other issue to consider is the fact that you will find that the provisions of the model law will find domestication either in your administrative procedures, your legislative procedures, found in various acts and not necessarily as one law or an omnibus. I hope this clarifies the inquiry that was made, honorable colleagues.
Indeed, I'm sure the honorable participant is answered. If not, they can come in with a follow-up question on the chat platform. Any more comments, honorable participants? Any comments?
I see a hand from Harrison Oliver Ernest. I don't know if it was an earlier submission.
Okay, Harrison, you can proceed if it's a new hand. Mr. Harrison, you have the floor. Seems like it was an earlier hand.
Comme c'est le cas de plusieurs institutions, oui, je dis tout à l'heure qu'il faut tenir compte des caractéristiques des autres institutions supérieures de contrôle des finances publiques. Il y a celles qui sont à caractère juridictionnel et d'autres à caractère administratif. Et le cas de Madagascar, par exemple, c'est une institution supérieure de contrôle à caractère juridictionnel. Là, donc, je crois qu'il faut tenir compte de ce cas-là, puisque je pense que la nomination du chef de l'IEC ce serait donc différente pour chaque pays, mais je crois que ce qui doit unir tout le monde, c'est sur la protection de la personne lorsqu'il est nommé donc au poste de président du bureau du vérificateur général ou bien de la Cour des comptes. C'est seulement donc cette remarque que je veux apporter donc sur cette loi type que nous avons discuté aujourd'hui. Voilà, Monsieur le Président, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. You may proceed to lower your hand. Mr. Greenberg, do you want to respond?
Nothing to add to what I said in response to the first part of the honourable delegate's remarks.
Thank you very much. Any more comments? I don't see, oh, I see two hands. Mr. Oh, there's Kaone Solomon. Please proceed.
Thank you very much again. I've seen how some of the things have been left for the minister to do by regulations. But then again, it will be the role of the drafter to ensure that primary, to ensure that substantive provisions are in the regulation.
Babe.
Oh God. Should I continue? Hello.
Sincere apologies, madam. You may proceed.
Oh, okay. All right. I was saying, I have seen how some of things have been left for the minister to do by regulations. But again, it's for the drafter who will be drafting the law to ensure that substantive provisions are in the act and administrative provisions are in the subsidiary legislation. But what I wanted to know is whether across Sadc member states, do we have a requirement for legislation to be tabled before the National Assembly to foster executive accountability and legislative regulation? Thank you.
Could I respond to that by saying that although I don't have knowledge of the administrative law of each of the SADC member states, I have assumed as a basic minimum that in the context of subordinate legislation under this model law, Parliament will wish to have oversight, and the clause 113 to which I drew delegates' attention a few moments ago accordingly proceeds on the basis that Parliament will scrutinise all subordinate legislation and quasi-legislation under the model law. But as Madam Secretary-General said a few moments ago, each jurisdiction will domesticate in accordance with its own administrative law arrangements. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I hope you are answered, Madam.
Yeah, thank you. I think that was for, member states. Because if you are dealing with money, then subsidiary legislation has to be scrutinized by Parliament. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You can proceed to lower your hand.
If I may, just to add value to that comment,
Sure, Madam.
Director, you'd kindly allow me?
Yes, please proceed.
Just in agreement of the comments that were made, and just to emphasize that, we cannot utilize the model law effectively if we are not going to take into account the country's legal system and traditions. And therefore, the assertions that are being made currently to make sure that we integrate into the context and realities of every country or jurisdiction is actually quite important. So in no way will the model law replace or undermine what is happening at country level. So the attention that is being given by these deliberations are quite important. And as Dr. Greenberg has indicated, the formal provisions and processes for adoption will organically come from the persuasive
Madam, are you still there? I missed the last part of your intervention. Hello, Madam SG. Madam SG, are you still there? Madam SG, we missed the last part of your intervention. We seem to have lost her, and we can proceed if there are any other comments or interventions. Distinguished participants, any more comments? If not, then perhaps I will invite anyone from Sadc PF if there are any issues that they want to raise before we close the meeting. Hello, Sadc PF. Is there anything?
No, Director, can proceed.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. I think what remains for us is to close this meeting and thank everyone who has participated. We thank the countries that were represented here, the attorney generals from the respective countries, and we thank you for all the comments, for all the inputs, and the lively discussion that we have had today. And I also want to thank Madam Secretary General, Ms. Boemo Sekoma, for the welcome address. We also want to thank the Chief Executive Officer of the Pan-African Lawyers Union, who gave us a keynote address. And also thank our model law drafter, Mr. Daniel Greenberg, for a wonderful and splendid job. He has taken us through the model law, and he has responded to some of our questions, comments, and suggestions. Thank you very much. For all those who promised to send in written submissions, you are reminded to do so. Send in your comments so that they also form part of the finalization process of the model law on public finance management process. And what remains is for me to thank everyone, including our interpreters and those who enables this meeting to proceed, the IT guys. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
IT, kindly terminate.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you from Tanzania as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much.